Hello, grade 11s. How are you? Today we are going to be talking about our new section of work. How exciting! We are going to be looking at the ecology of the land, the study of where things live, and our humans have buggered it all up. Alright, so first slide, let's get all scandalous as usual. Planet under not much pressure, absolute trash. So polar bears are thriving, sure. Storms are not getting worse at all. Cars are cleaner. Energy costs less. More farm production means more wilderness. Of course, we're not taking away, areas for animals and plants to live naturally. More oil. Yes, we're not using it at all. The global trade enriches all of us. The environment is better than you think, of course. I mean, look outside. We're in South Africa. It's perfectly fine. And even during COVID, I mean, the skies are just so much more blue. It will stay this way forever. Population growth is not a threat at all. We're not on the verge of collapsing. I mean, we can fit in another 3 billion people, and our, population size hasn't increased that much. I mean, poverty is completely reducing, and urban has less impact. I mean, we're literally planting trees. What is the world's problem? All right, so this is a dozen reasons to be cheerful. All right, it's absolute trash. So welcome to human impact on the environment and your ecology section. I absolutely love this section. It is long. It is a very, very long section. Slides go all the way up, I think, in the 150s. So I'm going to reduce and really only put in the important stuff, and then maybe when we get back to school I'll elaborate here and there, just so you guys have a slightly better understanding of some of the sections. And it's nothing really crazy. I'm actually just going to maybe focus more on teaching the stuff that I actually do put in the exams, because the other stuff, it helps you understand, but it's maybe not necessarily something you need to learn off by heart. But I'll use my own discretion, and I'll give you a good ecology section of work, especially for those of you who eventually go to university one day and you don't study ecology, but you're going to have to understand ecology quite extensively, because the theory of how things live and how we affect and the repercussions and situations or responsibility that we have for all of this is quite important later on. Right, so we're going to start with pollution. What is this stuff? It's any undesirable change in the physical, chemical, or biological properties of air, water, or soil. And we're going to talk about different kinds of pollution as well, and how that affects the population, and not only of humans but of everything. But the undesirable change, physical can be like how we actually have built our environment around us. Chemical could be like spilling of oils in the ocean. Biological could be including species that shouldn't be there. We can also how we've genetically modified certain organisms, or we've put organisms in the wrong place. Okay, and that is of air, water, and soil. So there is some water pollution, just so you can have a look. That is physical pollution, and maybe some chemical, depending, and even biological, depending on what is growing on that pollution itself. Sorry, all right, so let's look at degradable pollutants. These are substances that can be broken down naturally or artificially. Okay, and humans like to do this. We're currently busy working on a fungus that eats plastics in the ocean. There's a couple of South Africans actually busy working on it, and they're on the verge of getting it right. But we also don't know what the long-term effect of going to have that type of fungus in the ocean is going to be. And, will the fungus be able to survive underwater, and blah, 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 blah. All right. These substances can be removed from the environment because they are degradable. And then another word that also pops up often is biodegradable. That is when we can actually break it down using not chemicals, but enzymes, bacteria, funguses, so on and so forth. And a good example is sewage. So biodegradable substances are broken down naturally by microorganisms. You need to know that, please. All right, and there is a good example of some poop coming out of a tube that you have probably produced. How exciting. Look, it's probably your poop. All right, then we have our non-degradable pollutants. These are substances that can't be broken down naturally or artificially. They are not removed from the environment. Examples, plastic. And there is a lovely picture of, looks like a Filipino kid who is busy pulling out certain plastics that can be recycled. Remember, not all plastics can be recycled, and this is the problem with plastics. Some plastics are organic and others are not organic. The non-organic ones are the ones that we really have to worry about, but to a large extent it's the the reusable ones that we actually want. And the amount of money that we spend on recycling, it's actually very much worth it. But as a global consciousness, we need to stop the idea of using single-use plastics, so stuff like straws, plastic bags. Even though it's still extremely rife, and even I, to a large extent, I forget that I have little like plastic packets, well, not non-plastic packets that I need to use when I do shopping, but I just don't get that far. All right, so when studying pollution, the following needs to be taken into account. Pollutants are not only chemicals, but also include heat, sound, radioactive rays, and X-rays. So heat specifically, like increasing the amount of heat that goes into water, because dissolved oxygen inside of water actually becomes disassociated or gets kicked out as bubbles when a liquid gets too hot. And I recommend what you do is you put some water in a bottle and you leave it in the sun, and you'll see bubbles form on the side, and that is because all of the dissolved oxygen is actually starting to bubble out. Sound, like we spoke about the idea of like when things are too loud, certain animals will not be able to function properly, as well as we heard of like noise pollution at night when our neighbors are blaring their music while having a huge party. That is sound pollution. Radioactive rays and X-rays come from our diminished greenhouse, our what do you call the thing around the earth, our atmosphere, and that's allowing a whole bunch of extra sun rays inside. A pollutant has a harmful effect on the environment. So if you put something in and it has no effect, it is not a pollutant, unless eventually it does start doing something, and then it does become a pollutant. So pollution is the result of only human activity. We're the only ones who actually put pollution into this world, and that's why humans should actually reduce in population size, but we won't talk about that until matric. All right, so pollution occurs when a substance is added to the environment faster than what the environment can cope with it. So to a large extent, even these non-biodegradable, like Mother Nature has ways of putting it away. So to a large extent, we found the other day that a lot of the plastic in the ocean disappeared, and that is because when the tectonic plates moved, it sucked in a whole bunch of plastic, and that actually caused it to disappear. Sure, there was a lot of carbon dioxide that was released afterwards, but Mother Nature did do something about it to a large extent. And not that Mother Nature had an actual brain that thought about this, but there are ways and means that you get rid of natural stuff, and we can get rid of artificial stuff as well. All right, so this is what we're going to be looking at. I told you it's called human impact on the environment. These are the 5 strands we're going to be looking at: the atmosphere and the climate change, water, food security, loss of biodiversity, and finally solid waste disposal. So we're going to be starting with the atmosphere and climate change, then we'll get into water. We're not going to focus too much on food security because it's not that important, but I will briefly do it with you. Loss of biodiversity is obviously super important, and how all 5 of these are actually interlinked between each other. And then we're going to finally do well, actually after water we're going to do solid waste, and then we'll do loss of biodiversity, and finally food security, and how they all literally interlink between each other. And if one day you go and become an ecologist, a diagram like this will probably be about a 4-5 hour exam where you could write pages upon pages upon pages about how all of these are completely interlinked. I mean, atmosphere increasing could change the temperature of the water, which affects how solid waste gets dissolved. And, if that gets into the water, it's going to affect how, if we water our lands, it's not going to cause proper crop growth, which is going to cause food security. But at the same time, planting more crops is going to cause a loss of natural biodiversity in the area. It really, there's many ways of going around this, and it becomes quite a fight. With a lot of ecologists and big mining companies and big plastic producing companies, and this work is very solid work, but it's not always life-changing work, and some ecologists actually sell their souls to the devil and get paid under the rug to actually allow certain companies to do certain work without actually having any repercussions. Okay, anyway, moving on from that crazy part. So we're going to start at the atmosphere and climate change. We're going to look at CO2 emissions, then carbon footprints, deforestation, greenhouse effect, methane emissions, and the ozone depletion. Okay, greenhouse effect and ozone depletion kind of go hand in hand. Methane emissions from cows, CO2 emissions from everything that we use in industry, and we're going to look at acid rain as well, carbon footprint, what that is, and then finally deforestation, which is a very, very sad, and quite close to my heart actually. All right, so let's have a look at the gases that comprise the Earth's atmosphere. We notice that nitrogen is the main one. It accounts for about 77% or 76.5, 76.6. I don't know what you feel like saying. It really is a large amount. Then we have oxygen, which is about 20.1%. I'm just going to round up, it's easier. Then we have argon, water vapor, carbon dioxide, and then miscellaneous gases. And this is just like whatever is left in the atmosphere as a whole. Notice that water vapor, there is quite a lot of it, and that's good because we need clouds. And carbon dioxide is useful because we're not the only ones, and that says carbon dioxide. We're not the only ones who need the carbon dioxide. Plants need it, so it is like we do need. You remember, like carbon dioxide is the oxygen for plants to a large extent, so they do need it. Argon, not that important. And then one of the other things that is becoming a big problem is the amount of helium in the atmosphere as well. So we're actually starting to run out of helium, and with that reduction in helium, we're actually going to not be able to run a lot of our processes because we keep on extracting it and we don't put it back in the atmosphere. All right, so these are some of the primary pollutants and secondary pollutants and how all of this affects the formation of acid rain. So the primary pollutants themselves, we have sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, nitrous oxide, carbon dioxide, and then nitrous dioxide. Most hydrocarbons are suspended particles, so there's a lot on there. So I'm going to focus on the hydrocarbons quickly. Those are anything like when you burn, or have you ever driven behind a car and the car's got that really dark stain at the back of it? And that is because it's like producing a lot of smoke at the back of it. And that is because all of that is being burned actually doesn't completely vaporize, and it actually creates this really thick black layer, and that is what we see as pollution in the atmosphere when we're driving from like a very clean area to a very dark area. You can see that brown haze in the atmosphere, and that is actually because of the hydrocarbons. Now, scary story. All of those primary pollutants, which I expect you to know, when they mix with water, remember when we did eutrophication, I explained to you how carbon dioxide bonds with water to create some carbonic acid. Same thing is happening over here. So when it bonds with water, we're going to create some sulfuric acid or sulfuric acid, hydrogen peroxide, nitric acid, and a whole bunch of other really dangerous substances. And those can actually eat your skin away. To a large extent, in very polluted areas, when it rains, people run away from the rain because they know it's actually going to cause skin problems much later on in life. And people who are exposed to that rain for long periods of time actually age and form wrinkles, and their skin becomes extremely saggy at a very young age and actually don't age well whatsoever. Then we have natural, stationary, and another natural. So the natural on the far right hand side, that is from your explosions and eruptions from volcanoes. Then we have stationary, which is like all of our industry, mobile, and then finally we have natural. And even like to a large extent natural, we've created as unnatural because we started something called fracking, where we actually crack into rock and release all of the gas. But those gases can actually cause major damage to the environment as a whole. Okay, so we're going to look at carbon emissions first. And this is the Earth's carbon cycle itself. Okay, so I don't expect you to know this off by heart, but I expect you to have a brief understanding of this. So we've got fossil fuel burning on the far left hand side over there. I'm going to look at how we're increasing the amount, and then we'll talk about how we're going to try and decrease it and the words that go with it. So we have the lithosphere carbon stores, that is all of your coal, oil and gas. We also have limestone and dolomite. Those all where our carbon is stored inside. So the coal, oil and gas is going to be extracted and or mined, and that is going to be used in processes, which is going to be burning fossil fuels. So remember, the definition of a fossil fuel is any fuel that is from the ancient times where an organic system has actually sort of become a liquid or a solid or a gas, and that is mined. If we also breathe, so that is the biomass component over there, that is releasing carbon dioxide. If we cut down trees, that's going to increase We have soil organic matter, so all the microorganisms that are breathing as well, they're releasing a lot of carbon dioxide. And we have aquatic biomass, so anything that lives in the ocean, and there are a lot of things that live in the ocean, they're able to actually go through a lot of cellular respiration, producing a whole lot of carbon dioxide. But now, how do we get rid of this? We can also turn all that carbon dioxide into glucose through the process of photosynthesis in two ways, either by trees and or aquatic biomass. So all of the phytoplankton, and please note that everyone's saying plant trees, and it is important that we do plant trees, but all of the phytoplankton and algae in the ocean is actually accounting for majority of the storage of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and then that gets eaten by a whole bunch of structures in the ocean, and that then turns it into food for them. Okay, so majority of the algal or phytoplankton, they convert the carbon dioxide, whereas plants on soil. So plants are on land, whereas the phytoplankton's in the ocean, right? Then humans using fossil fuels faster than we, the earth, what the earth can replace them. This is called a non-renewable resource. So the idea of sustainability is using a some sort of substance in such a way that we don't abuse it. So we're giving it time to replenish itself. But to a large extent, we find that fossil fuels are non-renewable because the earth cannot age fast enough, and those fossils cannot produce fossil fuels quick enough, then we are actually using them, and this becomes a major problem. And that's why we started looking at alternative fuel ways so that we can actually maintain the world. And we're trying to go green, so we're using geothermal, we're using light, all those bits and pieces. So some of the main world sources of CO2 emissions: we have energy supply like electricity, we have wastewater, forestry, agriculture. Look how big agriculture is. I mean, it's because of all that plowing and stuff that we do with those large machines, and then harvesting as well. We don't use humans, we use cars and stuff, or not cars, trucks and tractors. That's the word I'm looking for. Industry, obviously, that's creating all of your steel and wood and so on and so forth. Residential and commercial. Notice how a home itself doesn't directly increase the amount, but it's because of how residential is connected to energy supply and industry that it actually should be bigger. And finally, we have transport over there. Why is carbon dioxide so important though? It is considered the most significant greenhouse gas just because it's actually produced a lot, or there's a lot of it produced. And this is because carbon dioxide can remain in the environment for a very long time, 50 to 200 years. And any process producing carbon dioxide today could affect the climate for hundreds of years. Okay, so if we're going to produce a small amount every single time, and it's lasting between 50 to 200 years, and we just keep on putting in, there's nothing that's going to be taking it away. Carbon is present in all living things and moves through the environment in chains of reactions called the carbon cycle. Remember that you are a carbon-based organism. That's why we teach you organic chemistry, or the organic molecules, the carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, vitamins, and DNA and RNA, nucleic acids, because all of them literally have carbon backbones. That's the definition of organic as well. So the level of carbon dioxide is in the atmosphere has increased since the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century. And then how might human activities have contributed to this? We spoke about it in the previous. Okay, so carbon dioxide is one of the most important greenhouse gases because atmospheric concentrations have risen dramatically over the past century. Why do you think this is? Burning fossil fuels, deforestation, flooding lands, and construction of hydroelectric dams have all contributed to the rising levels of carbon dioxide. How many examples of burning fossil fuels can you think of, and are there any alternatives? There are many alternatives, but the alternatives sometimes are actually worse. So this is where things become important. This you need to really focus on. Because the Industrial Revolution, carbon dioxide levels were usually kept in check by the carbon sink, forests and oceans that capture and store carbon. So what is a carbon sink? It is an organism that is able to trap carbon dioxide inside of it and store it so that it can be used in very special, or used in ways that is not going to add to carbon dioxide again. Okay, so to a large extent, forests, all green plants absorb carbon dioxide as part of photosynthesis, and they absorb carbon is only released back into the atmosphere when the plant dies and rots or is burned. Oceans, carbon dioxide dissolves the seawater in seawater depending on the temperature and pressure. Tiny marine animals called phytoplankton. Okay, phyto meaning plant, plankton meaning tiny animals. So plant-like green animals extract carbon from the carbon dioxide to make their skeletons and shells. Okay. Then we're quickly going to do carbon footprint, and then we'll move on. Well, then we'll be finished with this lesson. So what is your carbon footprint? It is the amount of carbon each individual releases on a yearly basis. Okay, that is a definition you need to know. So the amount of carbon that you produce. Now your carbon footprint is based on, let's say, so for instance, like my carbon footprint is not the best because I am the only person that drives in my car to school when we're allowed to go back to school, at least. Whereas people who share a lift with more people, because they're reducing the amount of cars and the amount of carbon dioxide that's being released, they have a smaller carbon footprint. One of the biggest and scariest things is if you have taken an international flight recently, your carbon footprint is probably higher than about 10% of the entire world's population. Okay, so I know that there are many people that do go overseas and have many flights, but there are many people that don't. Okay, so flying in an airplane is absolutely crazy. Driving a car, the products that you buy can also increase the amount of carbon dioxide. So whether you have a gas geyser or gas heated geyser, or you have an electrical gas heater, whether you use your, like, open your windows to get fresh air, or put your fan on, or use a what do you call that thing, it's not coming to me now, the thing that you put on a heater, but like the other heater thing, anyway, it's gone. All right, so your carbon footprint is based on how you actually function as a human being. So a measure of the total greenhouse gases caused by a country or organization or a person in a year. What effect do your actions and lifestyle have on the environment in terms of carbon dioxide emissions? There are actually ways of measuring your carbon footprint, and it's based on on averages, and it becomes quite scary. So if you'd like to Google that and actually go and watch up on that, it's quite scary. All right, so these are just some of the ways. So driving a car or being driven in a car. Do you recycle? How many of your things come from industry and bad industries? How much petrol do you use? Do you use diesel instead of petrol, or vice versa? And whether you've taken a flight. Okay, so last slide. Carbon footprint for the typical US household is 48 tons of carbon per year. 48 tons. Just think about how big a ton is. And now, like, average American has 48 tons of that. Okay, so what are some of the things that really add a lot to it? Transportation, housing, food, goods and services. So mainly motor vehicle fuel. Okay, that's a big one. Vehicle maintenance, air travel is also quite large over there. Then we have housing, so natural gas is fine. Then we have electricity, which is using majority of it, and then we have home construction, which is also a big one. In food, meat and other, like meat is a huge one. Oh my gosh, like the amount of carbon dioxide that is released from like production of meat is actually crazy. For goods, entertainment and clothing, jeans are one of the most damaging to the environment, funny enough, and we love wearing them, but they actually account for more carbon dioxide emissions as a whole than any other type of clothing that's produced. And then we have services, so like health care. Should we find ways of reducing all the other ones? I don't think we would actually care that much if healthcare used as much as it does, because it keeps us alive. And then entertainment and education, we can actually, the education is a bit higher, and that's because we use so much electricity. Food, cooking, PowerPoint presentations, electricity, all those bits and pieces. All right, so I hope this was a nice little introduction for you, and I've got your brains thinking, and next time we'll do some more on the air. All right, look after yourself, grade 11s. See you soon.